Welcome back to another installment of USPSA Film Room. I hope you liked the intro transition last time where I took the camera off my workbench and put it into the screen and thus began the video. That was complicated though, so I'm probably not going to do it again. Sorry for the noise in the background, but I need the things that are in the dryer right now, so you'll just have to put up with it. Hopefully it's not too bad. And thanks to a wonderful piece of technology known as a printer, I have notes this time, although not a script, so I'll be able to make sure I don't forget to say things that I want to say, and hopefully have fewer big delays in between thoughts. Anyway, so what we're going to do today is look at a movement habit of mine. So it's usually called a drop step, although I'm not sure I actually like that terminology. I think like a drop step it brings to mind something different, like say in basketball, as opposed to the thing that we do in USPSA. So a term I heard for it, watching a video of a baseball outfielder doing drills, is a false step. So namely, that is to say it's a step where you step opposite the direction you want to go, which in some cases that the guy doing the baseball outfielder drills said was a bad thing, but in cases that match my footage, he didn't really say either way. It's been something I've been looking into on the advice of a friend, the movement drills for different sports, since a lot of them are better studied than USPSA is, and it seems wise to absorb their wisdom. So anyway, that's my habit, to take that false step. As you can see with the red circles on the screen there, I've just finished shooting at a distant target rather, behind the barrel stack on the left. I'm beginning a reload and I've put my right foot back to push off as I run downrange to finish the stage. So, as I've kind of alluded to, that's against received wisdom. People would call it a bad habit, but I'm not so sure it is. So, before I dig into the film that makes me think it might not be such a bad habit, I would like to point out that I'm a lot less of an expert on movement than I am on the subject of the last film room episode, which is to say revolver reloads. So if this seems interesting to you, you should try it with a timer before you go all in. Preliminary item number 2. If I'm going to do something against the ordinary advice, I usually like to have a reason why it might be better, some justification for why I'm doing it the way I am. And the justification for this is that moving is controlled falling. It's just the way it is. That's how you walk. You fall over repeatedly and catch yourself before you face plant. And the way that seems to work to me is that your upper body leads the way. You can't really take a step unless your center of gravity moves forward, and the way you do that is to bring, kind of move at the waist or above the waist. So since you have to lean anyway, it seems like you might as well kick out a foot for extra push. At least it's not wasting any time. And I think the film bears me out, but we'll take a look and consider it together. So here I am in my garage. I've taken 2 stances here. So the first stance is kind of a balanced one. My weight is put evenly on my 2 feet, and my feet are a little bit wider than shoulder width apart. And the other one, so in this one, I'm actually fairly unbalanced. Most of my weight is on my right foot, since that's going to be my push leg. And the goal with that style of movement, with my weight on my right foot, is to sort of lunge to the left to get the movement going. So I guess we'll see how that works out. The less ghostly me is the one who's taking the drop step. So here is the first freeze frame I think is worth looking at. You can see that the less ghostly me, the one taking the drop step, is leaning way far to the left, which is to say I am poised to gain speed quickly. The step out and lunge me has gotten a lot wider, but my left foot still hasn't hit the ground, whereas on with the drop step, with the false step, my lead foot's already on the ground, ready to push off for the next step. And that actually is borne out through the entire process there. So I get the version of me that took the false step arrives at the next position about a step ahead of the other one. So I was talking about this on the R Reloading Discord in the competition shooting channel, and asking, am I doing this wrong? Because it seems like the standard wisdom is just completely incorrect, and it turns out that I may have been doing at least some of it wrong, so I'm going to move my timeline over here so you can see my feet. What somebody there suggested was that I should be looking at it like taking a runner's stance before, like taking a runner's stance in the position, so to prepare myself to explode out of it, as opposed to putting one leg more centered under my body and using that as a push-off leg. So I'm sorry for the vastly lower contrast here when the strange lighting and everything. I recorded this substantially after the other footage. So, yeah. It's a lot harder to follow. I'll have to do a lot more of the dragging of the opacity control back and forth, but we'll get through it. So the setup, as I was saying, is to take a runner's stance toward the next position and then basically look back at the target you want to leave on. And the goal is to leave like a runner leaving the starting blocks. So I'm still not quite sure I'm doing that right, so here's the me leaving... Well, so here's the me leaving like a runner, so I'm clearly not... Like, my feet aren't pointed in the direction I'm going, but I think that's just sort of the nature of taking a roughly shooting stance. My hips are substantially more pointed in the direction I want to go than they are in the balanced stance I usually end up in. So there's me in the balanced push-off stance, and here's me with my hips much more open, ready to go. So, on this first try, something that I noticed, my trail foot here, the foot I'm pushing off of, actually slides backwards. So if I step through that frame by frame, yeah. So here's where I'm starting. The buzzer goes off, and my left foot slides backward to give me a little bit more grip as I get going. It is still kind of a lunge, because I think that's inherent in leaving the shooting stance, I guess, with the knees bent and the feet wide. So I kind of get my front leg up, I push off of my back leg, and then I'm off to the races. Now if we look, however, at the false step me, I'm already ahead. So if let's go back to the beginning there, and at least near the beginning, and see how false step me does it. So there's the false step, kind of a little hop. Both my legs sort of lift at the same time. I'm not, at least when I'm really thinking about exiting hard, my lead foot and my trail foot both come off the ground as I get into the kind of aggressive leaning stance I take as I'm leaving the position. Let's watch that, I think, in the combined version real quick. So one thing I did notice here is that thinking of it like a runner stance means my legs do move a lot more in sync. So if we jump back to the previous video, I'll slide my timeline back, you'll see my legs are really in entirely different positions if I put it at 50-50. So there's one foot far to the left, which is my lead foot with the weight under me and taking a lunge. There's my lead foot, next up, my lead foot as I take the false step, and then my trail foot and my trail foot in the two things. So there's some very different body positioning going on as I'm leaving that position. Over here, I didn't know you could do that. So over here, as I'm leaving, my feet are basically they're following the exact same paths, and they're at nearly the same times. It's just that the false step ends up being a little bit faster off the line because I can take a more aggressive angle with my upper body. So I did it again, trying to keep my trail foot planted my trail foot planted as I was taking the sort of the runner stance / lunging step, and that actually turned out to be even closer. So as I kind of step through this slowly, you'll see the more solid me is the one taking the runner stance and leaving. So the false step me, as I change perspective again, has already gotten his lead foot down, while the runner stance me is still on the way there. But I do end up a little bit further ahead with the runner stance. My lead foot ends up a little bit further ahead with the runner stance. I am still about half a step behind there with the runner stance. Yeah, I think half a step is fair. So yeah, that kind of is that's mostly my findings out of this. There was a lot more practice of both of these things than maybe 10 seconds of video I have for you. So based on this, I'm pretty confident in saying that the false step for me isn't really any slower than the traditional plant a leg and push off of it approach. On the other hand, it does suggest that what I've demonstrated here, I think, is that the finding is limited really pretty much solely to hard exits. And not just on the longer runs that you saw here, even on roughly 8-foot runs, which would be, let me pop back to here, so 8 feet is roughly from my start position over in the far right of the screen to that log in the middle, that board in the middle rather. And on the other video, 8 feet is from the one end of my workbench to about the middle of my reloading bench. Alright, so you may have noticed, if you've been watching the timeline down in the corner where I'm scrolling through these, that I do have another set of footage here. And the reason why that is because both of the previous ones were movements without reloads, and those are not super common in Revolver. I wanted to know which one was faster, because it does come up every now and then. But really what I should be most concerned with is what's faster reloading. And that, I think, is a more interesting picture. So let me set this up. Again, the more ghostly me is pushing off, the less ghostly me is taking a false step. So you'll notice that the less ghostly me is behind in terms of the more ghostly me, the one who's taking the push off rather than the false step, is a step behind the other version of me. It's a step behind the false step, but the reload also comes off a whole lot smoother. So actually, the push off step here ends up being faster, and that's because if we watch that one, you'll see I'm taking really big sort of loping crossover steps here. And what that does is it means the gun is more stable. Now, reloading a revolver is basically a dexterity test, and running hard makes that harder. And as I said, most movements that you take with a revolver are going to have a reload in them, so it is important to consider that in planning your movements on a stage. The hard exit finding is interesting, especially since, I occasionally shoot some autos that I don't need to reload nearly as often. But in Revolver, it's a very small part of the game. And the false step does make those hard exits faster, but it makes hitting the reload harder on a subsequent move if I take one. That's my reading of this footage and of the other ones that the other attempts that I decided would just muddy things in the video. Yeah, so that is about all. What I think you'll see from me next year is I am going to continue taking those false steps when I'm running without a reload, but I am going to try to drill myself not to do that when I am reloading. So to go back to this very starting photo from the video, what I'm doing here is something I want to not do next year maybe, although it is different moving forward and back, and I should probably look at that too. Certainly when I'm moving side to side, I plan on just pushing off of my back foot, getting the reload done, and then if there's still running to do it as fast as I can. Other news: I may be dragged, kicking and screaming, into the early 20th century by circumstance next year. I have my eye on a backup gun, but it is in the 9mm caliber, which is, as I've said before, not really a fit caliber for a wheel gun, but beggars can't be choosers at this point. So I'm sure there'll be some content about that as I figure out what works in the 9mm Super GP and what doesn't. So you can look forward to that in the spring sometime, for sure. And for now, though, Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year, and I'll see you next time.